Chapter 3: The Mind. Life is an intelligent process, and this is not synonymous with having a brain. This statement can be verified by observing how microorganisms and plants behave intelligently. Intelligence is a creative action that is born in the present moment and affects the whole structure of the universe as a whole. The body is an example of intelligent life and the organism an example of inner life. Human beings are born to trust, empathize, be patient, cooperate and be honest, but different experiences from very early on have oppressed these innate, intelligent and universal capacities, transforming them into fear, mistrust and dishonesty. In exploring the emotional world of human beings, it is essential to understand how the brain works. Although much research has been done to understand how emotions, feelings, and the neural system work in our brains, we still have limited knowledge of these processes and mechanisms. The complex links between various factors, experiences, cultural beliefs, hormones, etc., and their influence on how we feel every day are not yet known. We have only come to several conclusions that give us a rough idea of how our brains work, and this is the best insight we have so far, although it is still evolving. Here are some ideas that can help us understand how the human brain works. What is the mind? Your nervous system circulates information, just as your heart circulates blood. All that information is what we define as mind, most of which is outside of our consciousness. The brain is what primarily moves and shapes the mind. How the brain works, areas of the brain, and how we process our experiences. All brains are apparently the same on the outside. With new visualization techniques, the uniqueness of each brain has been discovered. Neurons create networks according to the experiences they have had. People, even twins with a very similar genetic background, perceive the world individually, uniquely. It is the size of a coconut, the shape of a walnut, the color of liver, the texture of cold butter, and consumes 20% of our energy. It is also obsessed with saving energy. This is an important concept, because the thoughts that are created are based on neural circuits based on this energy saving. Neurons are nerve cells. It is well known that there are more neurons in the human body than there are stars in the universe. They communicate with each other through electrical energy, changes in action potential, which causes channels to open or close, and thus transmit information in the form of neurotransmitters. This transmission of information takes place through the synapses. Review: there are 100,000 types of neurons, 100 billion neurons, making 100,000 trillion connections. Each neuron has an average of 10,000 connections. We could compare it to a forest. The trees are the neurons, the crown is the soma, and the trunk is the axon where the connections are created. The latter are surrounded by myelin, a group of cells that support the structure of the brain and whose main functions are to modulate the speed of nerve impulse propagation and control the uptake of neurotransmitters. During adolescence, myelination increases and therefore improves the speed of transmission of information through neurons, which has a positive effect on learning. Axons surrounded by myelin form the white matter of the brain. The bodies of neurons and their branches called dendrites form the gray matter. Adolescents experience brain changes in both substances. At the onset of puberty, there is an increase in the density of synapses, gray matter due to increased utilization and strengthening. Review: it is important to clarify that accelerated synapse growth is as critical as synapse reduction. This process of synaptic pruning aims to reduce the excess of connections that are not functional for the person in his or her environment. What synaptic pruning does is to eliminate the less used synapses and reinforce the more frequently used synapses. This process of synaptic pruning does not usually end until the age of 16-18. Neuroplasticity. Physiologically, the brain functions as a single unit. The brain is composed of two hemispheres connected by the corpus callosum, through which they continuously transfer information back and forth. The mind emerges from the joint action of both hemispheres. Although the function of each hemisphere is still the subject of research, it is possible to recognize specific mental modes that process information more intensively in one hemisphere than in the other. Both hemispheres work together, exchanging information. Intuitive solutions to problems arise when the brain achieves more intense connectivity between its two hemispheres. The corpus callosum continues to grow and facilitates the passage of information from one hemisphere to the other, thus facilitating the integration of information, understanding, and interpretation. If there has been good development of the hemispheres, there will be greater facility for thinking skills. The brain is a changing, dynamic and unique organ. The brain is plastic throughout life, i.e., it is capable of being modified by learning at any age, although it is most efficient in the early years of development, a sensitive period for learning. Plasticity is a brain property that is genetically programmed and adaptable to the life experiences of each human being. Neurons create connections, circuits, but they are not static, they are called neural networks. At each moment, we sculpt in real time according to what we pay attention to and pay attention to, Ramon Y. Cajal. Neural interconnections are adaptively reorganized by enlarging or shrinking contact surfaces, making modifications, pre- and post-synaptic, modifying the properties and density of receptors for efficient signal transmission, and so on. By way of translation, let's imagine a road map of Spain, where there are motorways, national roads, secondary roads. Some are wider, straighter, longer and more direct. The more secondary roads tend to make more curves and get lost along the way before reaching their destination. But who hasn't experienced the sensation of the traveler effect when, after taking the time to enter secondary roads, time stops and you are amazed by any landscape, be it the Castilian plateau with its infinite expanse or stately trees in the countryside of Cadiz? This is one way of understanding how our brain works. Throughout life it builds highways, which are thoughts, ideas that we have repeated ad nauseam and have become our truths. And we have left aside the more secondary roads that are new possibilities and perspectives of thought as they are more costly and slower. But the brain has a wonderful capacity. With its self-transforming plasticity, it is capable of converting highways into secondary roads and vice versa. At a functional level, the brain is divided into three, known as the triune brain. According to this theory, human behavior can be analyzed in a holistic way, where cognition, emotion and human behavior work in unison and definitely influence the performance of the subject in any field. The ternary brain theory determines that the brain is composed of three layers, the oldest called the reptilian brain, which performs the most basic and instinctive survival functions such as breathing, heart rate, muscle tone. The second layer, the mammalian, limbic or emotional brain, and the most recently formed layer, the human brain, neocortex or cerebral cortex, the most evolved part that characterizes the human being with its rational nature. Depending on the type of sensory stimulus received by the organism, specific areas of the brain will be activated, creating neural circuits. Thanks to new neuroimaging techniques, it is possible to see exactly which areas and neural networks are activated when we learn, how intensely, and the relationship between the different brain structures. Other properties of the brain are neurogenesis, olfactory bulb and hippocampus. Neurogenesis is the brain's ability to create new neurons throughout life, contrary to the myth that we are born with a certain number of neurons and they die throughout life. States of illusion over the course of days and passion cause stem cells to go to the hippocampus and transform into neurons. Review: neuroprotection is the ability of neurons to avoid oxidative stress. Through foods containing antioxidants such as nuts, flavonoids, fish, but also survival. Despite having evolved from a reptilian brain, based mainly on basic survival functions such as breathing, temperature regulation, to an emotional brain and the part that makes us conscious humans, the neocortex, the main function of the brain is to survive. An emerging mind. The brain is composed of two hemispheres. The left hemisphere coordinates the right side of our body on a motor level and vice versa. They are practically symmetrical, although more and more subtle differences are becoming apparent. The left hemisphere is defined as more calculating, reasoning, judging, based on a linear perception of time, with more specific sets of neurons for shaping language, for example. In contrast, the right hemisphere, more artistic, more active in people who play an instrument, less logical, is based more on visual simultaneity, which we could translate as present experience. All this is based on studies where brain activity is recorded while people perform a specific activity. But as in football, it is not a matter of understanding how one hemisphere or one neuron works, but understanding how the whole works. We are our brain functions, which is called having an emergent mind. Neural manipulation. There are neural mechanisms capable of eliminating the blind spot generated by the optic nerve in the retina, of replacing reality with a mental image, of altering a memory. Revising, modifying the order of a title to offer us a meaningful now, forgetting certain experiences, imposing false sensations of happiness. The ego is then all those neural defense mechanisms that manipulate our perception of reality and give rise to our interpretation of things. The body responds by activating physiological mechanisms. These molecules either go to the brain, which responds, sometimes the response in the body, or acts directly in the cell, modifying gene expression. The interpretation of reality affects our state of mind, which depends on our attitude, drug use, health, sleep, personality, nutrition, etc. Professional partner. For example, it is much easier to memorize a long number if we give each number a meaning than the numbers themselves. We memorize better by associating concepts. Every time I see a tree, I associate it with an experience I had as a child. That circuit has been reinforced by me paying attention to that thought every time my brain produced it. And reinforcement means that the tentacles of a neuron have enlarged and created a wider area of contact with the neurons that are part of that circuit. If I stop paying attention, the tentacles decrease in size, and there is the option of creating other circuits. The second brain. It is not only in the brain that neurons are found, as until recently believed. Today the gut is known as the second brain due to the presence of between 200 and 600 million neurons. These neurons send information to the brain and vice versa. As part of the new paradigm, the brain does not differentiate fact from fiction. Our body responds in a similar way to something that is happening or to something we are imagining. Studies show that 50% of good nutrition lies in the quality of the food we eat. The other 50% depends on our mental state during the ingestion and digestion of the food. This example reminds us of the growing trend to give the brain, hitherto thought of as a command center, its rightful place as an organ of the body. Attention. The first thing we have to do to remain attentive is to prepare our attention. This originates in the brainstem, in the stem that holds our brain, in the extension of the neck. This is where the ascending reticular system, ARIS, is located. This system is responsible for activating those nuclei, clusters of neurons in the brain that will then distribute information about what we are paying attention to virtually the entire cerebral cortex. Several studies have shown that the variation in the number of breaths per minute makes us capable of increasing our attentional resources, and we can even know the depth of meditation by taking into account the brain's response to breathing. Breathing activates the noradrenaline systems that keep us attentive and motivated in our practice. Once we are ready, we must be able to maintain our attention. We leave the trunk and arrive at the next station, the cortex, and in particular the frontal areas. The brain learns by habit. Regular meditation practice produces changes in the anatomy of the brain. The increase in the prefrontal areas, with the practice of meditation, means more neural resources involved in sustaining attention. We are very easily distracted, and it is difficult to realize this. This brings us to the next station, the anterior cingulate cortex, ACC, which is one of the most important areas for the resolution of this conflict. It makes the unconscious conscious. And meditative practice produces changes in this area as well. It is key in self-regulation, as it allows us to realize that we are leaving with a thought. But a fundamental ingredient is needed to realize the state of mind, the idea of I. The insula is the CCA's ally in providing personal reference. It is a key area in the brain because it connects the emotional systems to the cortex. It is the system that makes emotion conscious. It has even been said that increased activation of the insula can be interpreted as improved awareness of the present moment. Dynamics, looking each other in the eye. Objective, to detect mental interference. To observe thoughts. To become aware of attention. In pairs you sit opposite each other. The task is simple and clear. You have to look each other in the eye for 5 minutes. After the 5 minutes, you can discuss together whether it was easy to keep your attention, what thoughts came up, how I felt, where my focus was. In addition to working on attention. And now that we have the basics down, let's explore how the thought process works and how we can relate peacefully to our thoughts. The thought process. Experiment 1. We sit in a comfortable position, but with a readiness to attend, back straight, soles of the feet on the floor, crown of the head up, hands on our legs. We close our eyes. We breathe through our nose to let our brain know that we need to concentrate. And we observe our thoughts like clouds on a windy day. We see how they come and how they go, we don't go with them. For 3 minutes, without forgetting to pay attention to the breath. At the end we share them. There will be people who have not been able to differentiate what a thought is. Others that their brain has sent one thought after another, others will have let themselves go as if they were watching a film. The conclusion is that the brain produces thoughts like the heart beats. The brain is an organ. The brain is an organ, like the heart or the liver. Just as our heart pumps blood, our brain produces thoughts. We don't say, I read, but we do say, I think. Wouldn't it be more correct to say, my brain thinks? A thought is constructed from a memory, image, projection, and frequency of use. The brain proposes to us the thoughts we use the most. If we don't pay attention, the thought tends to disappear, without struggle, without conflict. And the most incredible thing is that either a memory modifies the neural structures to adapt the brain to a life experience, or the neural structures modify the memory to adapt it to our current way of seeing the world. Experiment 2. Participants are asked to watch a video linked on the interactive version book. The different perspectives are then shared. What did you see? The facilitator can encourage discussion by asking participants to share. Each person will tell the movie that their brain has created from circles, lines, and triangles. Each brain is unique and therefore each brain will tell a story. Taking this information into account, we can conclude that every thought is a possibility and not a fact. Here we are offered the opportunity to transform thoughts into proposals. Experiment 3. Objective: to observe the thinking process. First, ask participants to note the extent to which their mind is excited or calm, and their sense of bodily well-being. Participants are asked to close their eyes. Without further ado, a tap is turned on for 4 minutes. At the end of this time, participants are asked to reflect on whether their mental excitability and/or bodily sensation has changed. This is shared. There are many possibilities. Some people feel better because their brain has associated the water with memories of the sea or relaxing music. On the other hand, there will be brains that associate the noise with the expense of water, poverty, inequalities, etc. This experiment leads us to conclude that review and add plaque rule: nothing can make you feel, only the idea that you have about that thing. Experiment 4. Missing explanation: gymnasts. Conclusion: the brain does not differentiate fact from fiction. Recipe for perception. The brain translates internal and external stimuli into electrochemical signals. The senses take in information from the outside. They are the first to filter stimuli and convert them into electrochemical impulses that the brain can understand. This information passes to the primary cortex, where it is analyzed and selected according to color, position, temperature, etc. It then goes to the secondary area, where it is associated and gives meaning to the previously analyzed information. The retina receives a part of the enormous amount of information that surrounds us, 10 billion U/s, but only 6 million U/s fit on the retina and 1 million through the optic nerve. In the end, 10,000 U/s reach the visual cortex intact, i.e. 0.01% of the units we receive with visual stimuli. If we take into account the other senses and add them, we can say that we perceive 5% of reality. This means that we discuss and make decisions on the basis of this 5% of reality that we perceive, and this is without taking attention and memory into account. With our attention, we capture 10% of the 5% that we perceive, which becomes the raw material available to build a memory, i.e. 0.5% of the external information. 99.5% of what is happening in a life situation we are not taking into account. A memory is only 0.5% true to reality. Now we have to add memory. A day has 57,600 seconds, and a counted memory spans approximately 20 seconds, i.e. 0.0034% is created from our interpretation, not from reality. 0.5% comes to consciousness, a memory that is left with 0.034% of information. In the end, a memory contains less than 0.1% of all the information existing in reality. The 99.9% we have lost or modified along the way. That is why we can say that we remember thoughts and feelings, not facts. The brain areas used for memories are the dorsolateral cortex, prefrontal cortex, and hippocampus, which are the same areas that give rise to expectations, projections of the future. If we have no expectations, the brain stops altering memories and looking for coherence, because there is no future projection to satisfy. The future does not exist for our brain. It is a projection of the past, which in turn is a distorted projection of the present. If the past contains 0.1% of reality, how much reality can the future have if it is a projection of the past? Approximately 0. Therefore, we can say that ideas are based on 0.01% of reality. But the mind is nothing without the body. Comprehensive health. Psychoneuroimmunology is the science of how our thoughts can affect our immune system. It studies the connection between thought, speech, and the physiology of the human being. Thought and speech are a form of life energy that has the ability to interact with the body and produce profound physical changes. Studies have shown that 1 minute spent in negative thinking leaves the immune system in a delicate situation for 6 hours. Distress, that feeling of being permanently overwhelmed, produces very surprising changes in the functioning of the brain and in the hormonal constellation, has the capacity to damage memory and learning neurons located in the hippocampus, and affects our intellectual capacity, because it leaves those areas of the brain that are most necessary for making the right decisions without blood flow. Every thought generates an emotion, and every emotion mobilizes a hormonal circuit that will have an impact on the 5 trillion cells that make up an organism. We need to take the focus off those thoughts that are upsetting us, causing discouragement, anger, or worry. We will always find reasons to justify our bad mood, stress, or sadness, and that is a certain line of thinking. But when we base it on how we want to live, another line appears. It is smarter, not more reasonable, to bring the focus of attention to the breath, which has the ability to calm our mental state. Conscious, deep breathing alone has the capacity to produce changes in the brain. It acts on the endocrine system, which is a system of glands that secrete a set of substances called hormones, which, when released into the bloodstream, regulate the body's functions. Abdominal breathing promotes the secretion of hormones such as serotonin and endorphin, and improves the tuning of brain rhythms between the 2 hemispheres. Words are a form of vital energy. Depending on how we speak to ourselves, we shape our emotions, which change our perceptions. The transformation of the observer alters the observed process. We do not see the world that is, we see the world that we are. When our brain gives meaning to something, we experience it as absolute reality, unaware that it is only an interpretation of reality. Words alone activate the amygdaloid nuclei. They can activate, for example, the fear or anger nuclei that transform hormones and mental processes. It is being discovered that meditation can influence, among other things, the nervous system. It has been shown that when a person is able to reduce the inner cacophony and enter into silence, migraines and coronary pain can be reduced by 80%. Paradoxically, it would seem that genetics is at odds with happiness. Somehow the survival strategies of the species are generators of suffering. As if we were constantly in danger, we have a radar system that is constantly seeking to focus on what might be negative for us. We have a need to separate that which is related, creating a boundary between the self and the world, a striving to stabilize that which is always changing, to keep inner systems within precise limits. We struggle to preserve elusive pleasures and avoid unavoidable pains, to seize opportunities and avoid threats. We breathe an atmosphere of permanent anxiety. Possible dynamics. Past, present, future. Contact, random thought interference.